Welcome you all. Good morning to the Housing and Regeneration Committee. As per normal circumstances, we are broadcast live to the nation. Can you please keep your mics on mute when we're not contributing in debate or asking questions? And we'll use the chat bar to indicate when we would like to come in. So welcome and good morning, everyone. Can I have a note of any apologies and substitutions, please?
Morning, convener. We've got 3 apologies this morning so far. Councillor Gallagher, Councillor Kerr and Councillor Logue. And in terms of Standing Order 64, Councillor Castles is substituting for Councillor Logue.
Thank you. Councillor Doolan has also indicated his apologies for this morning.
Councillor Doherty can't make it this morning either. Put his apologies in. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you very much, everyone. If we can move on to item 1 in the agenda, which is declarations of interest in terms of the ethical standards in public life, etc. Scotland Act 2000. Does anybody have any declarations? Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 3, Mayor's operational financial performance monitoring, due to my board member.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? If you have in any way omitted that, if we get to the agenda point, please articulate it at that or put in DEC to the chat bar. Moving on to item number 2, the Saltire Performance Report. It's on page 7 of our papers. And Brian, can I come to you, please?
Thanks, convener. Morning, everybody. Saltire Performance Report is a standard report we bring twice yearly to the committee to report on Saltire performance. Section 2 of the report explains the appendices attached to the back, and section 2.2 goes into a bit more detail in terms of the actual performance itself. Some of the highlights are that 2.21 April to February 2020 to February 21 currently emergency repairs was 3.03 hours in comparison to Scottish average of 4.3. Saltire's performance in this period is 2.47 hours. Timescale for non-emergencies is currently 4.41 days for all contractors in comparison to Scottish Housing Regulator of 7 days. Scottish average was 6.5. Saltire's non-emergency repairs year to date is half a day. 2.23 does notice that a lot of these improvements could be down to the fact that there's potential decrease in works and the period during COVID. So we expect these figures to increase slightly going forward. Customer satisfaction levels is 97.52% compared to 97% to the regulator 1920, and the Scottish average was 91.3. Again, repairs rate first time at 2.24 is 98.92% compared to the Scottish average of 91.8. And more or less, performance is pretty stable, pretty good, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Brian. Any questions to Brian on the Saltire report, colleagues? Councillor Valentine.
Thanks, Chair. Brian, on 2.11 on page 8, it refers to breakdown emergency, non-emergency repairs jobs carried out by a month for all 3 linked contractors, as well as Saltires only. Now, that same statement is made in item 3 for Mears, all 3 linked contractors and Mears only. Now, is the third contractor Walkers?
Yes, that's right.
Why do we not have a report on Walkers?
This has been reported on before my time, Councillor. It's the reporting. Walkers' contracts are very, very low in value compared to Mears and Saltires. That's something I'm happy to bring forward to a future committee if that's what committee would like me to do. But there was never any requirement to report Walkers' performance previously.
Right, it's okay. It's the fact that it quotes 3 linked contractors and we're only getting 2 reports. So that was my question on that. And one other question, if you don't mind, Chair, on the investigation, frontline resolution is investigations. Now, there's not a lot of them, and it's good that there's not a lot of them. If you look at page 9 on the table, 109 for stage 1, 10 for stage 2, so 119 altogether. Now, I was just wondering, I was having a look at the stats for how many actual repairs they go to, and this is minimal, these numbers, which is a good report for Saltire, and it's also the same for Mears. Is there a possibility, if it's too awkward, fine, but see, to put in the percentage, see that 119 total for year 2021?
Yeah.
Is it possible, without too much work, to put that as a percentage of the overall going to, visits, so that we understand? Because in my calculations, quick rough arithmetic earlier on the week, it's less than 1%. In fact, it's minimal, it's point something %. And it's just to give the committee an idea of how well both Saltire and Mears are doing, that these investigations, stage 1 and stage 2, are minimal. I don't know if that's easy to be done or not, but it would help the rest of us understand how well, with it, not only we're looking at the figures, but to see the percentage of that, if it's possible. If it's not possible, then we'll not worry about it. We'll work out ourselves. Thank Chair.
Thanks,
Brian,
Councillor, for
is that information feasible?
It should be. As Councillor Valentine points out, we do about 150,000 repairs a year, and it's less than 0.00 something of a % for most of us. But I'll have a look at that, and I'll come back and I'll see if I can do that. I don't think it's too difficult, because we should be able to we can separate the amount of repairs Saltire do and Mears do from the total we do. So that should be fairly straightforward. I'll look at that for next time, if that's okay.
Thanks very much, appreciated. I don't have any other questions in the chat bar. Is there any other questions from members? No. The recommendations are on page 7. Can we note the contents of this report, colleagues? Thank you very much. Moving on now to item 3. Brian, it's the Mears report, and colleagues, that's on page 15.
Thanks, Chair. Again, section 2.1 explains appendices. Section 2.2 again goes into more detail, and as Councillor Valentine pointed out, it's the same information for all 3 contractors on the timescales for emergency repairs. However, in this instance, Mears average emergency timescales are 3.15 hours. For non-emergencies, again, same information as the previous report. However, Mears average non-emergency timescale is 8.97 days against a Scottish average of 6.5. And as the previous committees, we've mentioned this before, being below average, but we've also pointed out that we are 98.92% for carried out first time, and that seems to be that the committee are satisfied with that going forward. The Scottish average being 91.9, so we'd rather get it right first time as had to go back. Customer satisfaction for Mears is up at 97.52. Again, the regular report was 97, Scottish average 91.3. Front-running resolutions are fairly stable as well. 98% of the complaints year to date being responded within timescales. Looking at 2.3 corporate property, the timescale for clean emergency is 13.3 and non-emergency 11.06. However, there seems to be an issue with the IT in there and recording these, because the timescales for emergencies is actually they get a 3-hour target and they always meet that target. I'll just try to find out the glitches in the system for why it's recording these numbers at what they are, and hopefully by next committee we will have that sorted. Moving on to financial performance at 4.16, based on unaudited accounts to 31st members, will be reported a trading of 482,000, an annual turnover 40 million. The trading profit was achieved in the first quarter before the impact of COVID kicked in. And 4.17b, comparison current assets and current liabilities equated to current net assets of 1.7 million, a current ratio of 1.16. A ratio less than 1 is an indication that the company may experience difficulty in its obligations. However, we're above the line and we're quite satisfied with that just now. Approved budget at 4.18 for 2021 indicates an annual profit of 1.869 million on a turnover of 48.9 million. Again, at the time of the budget submission, was anticipated that COVID would revert back to pre-COVID. However, obviously, as you were aware, we have only really started back on the 26th of April, so there will be a change to these, and we'll monitor throughout the year. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any questions on the Mears report, colleagues? I'm not seeing anything in the chat bar at this time. Councillor Morgan, I see you indicating on screen.
Thanks for taking that rudimentary form of communication, convener. It's that long since I've been at a WebEx meeting that this thing's taking a bit of time, like myself, to warm up. This report will be, if I read the report correctly, will be the second last report in this format prior to a new council administration, because it's coming here twice a year, every 6 months. And in view of the fact that there's a continuation of this, that's why I thought I'd go into it in some detail and ask for points of clarification. There are two areas that, with your permission, convener, I would seek clarification on, because they relate to the finances of this particular contract. Can I say on the operation from a personal perspective, although I don't think this necessitates me declaring an interest? I've benefited from my heating going down. The previous report was on the heating systems. Can I say I commend the service and how quick they were getting round to tenants like myself that needed that, and in the mere situation, having benefited over the last year from emergency repair, it was absolutely excellent. Not just me as a tenant, but the various people that I represent were coming on to me and saying how these services were continuing was commendable. In saying that, it's understandable that the finances were going to be impacted because people didn't want workers in the house social distancing. But there are two areas there that, because of that, finances have been impacted. And this is nobody's fault. I just want to get clarity. In view of the fact we've only got one more report of this in this administration, prior to whoever's going to succeed this administration will take this on, because the Mears contract's going on to 2024. And the first part of that, with that background, is in page 20, where I see a figure mentioned there that because of the backlog, we will lose out almost £2 million in a volume discount. Now, in a way, I think I'm right in putting that into the phraseology that that is some form of cutting revenue. So will that 2 million, 1.9 to be exact, it's at section 415, I've taken in my notes there. How much of that is related to housing revenue account, or is it housing and corporate? And will that continue into the 2024 extension, or will that have to be resolved by the end of this administration because of the financial regulations? There's a second part to the question with a much larger sum that's similar, convener, about how we take things forward. But that is the first part. Do you want me to get an answer on that, and the next one's over the page?
Can we take them both together, and that will allow Brian or Greg to answer fully and appropriately? Thanks, Tommy.
Thanks, convener. Well, that being the first part, I'll go over the page to page 21, and I see it section, and this is a much larger sum. The overall financial standing. The overall financial standing seems to be healthy, and the ratio of liabilities to assets or assets to liabilities. The ratio that's mentioned there is 1 to 1.161. However, there's a very significant reference there that's included in the report that says there is a continued reliance, and it's in section 417B, there's a continued reliance upon the parent company's rolling facility, which is up to a maximum of £8 million. Can I ask 2 points of clarification on that? Is the parent company putting that full £8 million in? Has council got any investment in that £8 million? And will that £8 million exhaust itself in this administration? Or, like the previous question related to that smaller sum, will that be a financial stone in the shoe, if that's the right way to put it, right to the end of 2024 before this whole contract will be recalculated and retendered? Clarification on those, I think, are important, Chair, because it's that, particularly the ratio. Well, the final point, if it wasn't for that £8 million, would we go into a dangerous situation of liabilities to the assets?
Thanks very much, Councillor Morgan. Brian, are you in the position to answer that, or do we need to ask another colleague to provide support or to provide a further report to committee?
4.15 can be. I'm going to ask Greg to do most of it, but my understanding is that it depends on the volume. The discount is all down to the volume of works they pass their way, and obviously because of COVID, we didn't give them. They never got as much work as they would normally get in an annual year. So the fact that we didn't get the money is because we didn't give it to them in the first place. If that makes sense. So I can pass it correctly. If you want to maybe meet the bones with this one, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so Councillor Morgan, there's two factors that has an impact on 4.1.5A and the volume discount. So as Brian says, we have passed less work to MERS, so they've had less ability to generate that volume discount for the council. But the second thing that's probably important to note is that during the period of the COVID pandemic, as part of the defined services arrangements that were agreed last April, we actually stood down on a temporary basis the volume discount because of the volume of works that were passed to MERS. So if you think of the principle of the volume discount for MERS is that if they're operating effectively, if they're operating doing the full range of activities, then they should be able to operate that. And what they bid for was basically a discount on the price as a result of that. And that discount comes to the council, but because of the pandemic and because of the restrictions and getting into people's homes and the restrictions in the work that they could do, they couldn't basically operate that full range of activity to be able to operate as efficiently as possible. So what Brian and the team agreed with MERS was a defined set of services and a defined set of staff that would be working on the contract during the lockdown periods, and we would pay for that on a kind of cost recovery basis. But as we've noted in the paper, I think it's on, not lost the place of it now, and something else in the paper, I can't quite find it. We've said and we've confirmed throughout the year that MERS operations have been operating in the COVID defined services agreement on a no profit, no loss basis. So what we're doing on a monthly basis is we're liaising with the MERS finance team to understand what their ongoing financial position is, and any impact that arrangement would have would come back to the council. So if they have an underlying profit as a result of COVID, then that will come back to the council. And we will make sure that that happens, and we'll monitor that on an ongoing basis. But as Brian says, that the defined services agreement could only really end on the 26th of April, because that was the sort of change in the restrictions or the removal of restrictions on working in people's homes. And it'll be at that point that we kind of take stock of where we are and have that discussion with MERS about what their sort of underlying profit or loss may well have been at that point in time. On the
Convener, I think I'm more rusty than I thought I was. I know the information that I'm given is in the report, and I understand the reasons for the shortfall. My point of clarification is, will that continue into the next financial year, and will it have to be wiped out in this administration? Because this contract is proposed to go to 2024. That's the significant point I'm asking. Does it have to be wiped out in this financial year, or can it be carried forward? I see Greg's nodding it. That is the more, I think, substantive point.
So once the defined services agreement ends, the volume discount will start up again. So now that the defined services agreement is ended on the 26th of April, that volume discount arrangement is back in place, and we will generate that income back into the council, and that the contract will be dealt with in accordance with the way that it's been signed in the past. It was that COVID period of time where we stood that down, and actually just so there's full clarity on that, the council makes a decision every year as part of its general revenue budget, that volume discount goes to the general fund. That's part of the annual budget setting process. There's always a line in the agreed motion that makes it clear that's transferred to the general fund. So that £1.9 million reduction, and it wasn't the full 1.9. I've not got the figure to hand. I can get it to you, but that reduction was a hit to the general fund, and has been part of what we've been projecting on the general fund throughout the financial year as an impact of COVID. Hopefully that clarifies, Councillor Morgan.
It does, Convener. It does, yes. Thank you.
So the second point on the loan facility. So that loan facility is up to £8 million in Part C, in 4.17 Part C. The loan account at that point in time stood at £2.4 million at the 31st of December. That's the lowest that's been for a number of years, and that's entirely with the parent company. The council's got no interest in that, and the council's not put any additional cash, if you like, into that at all. That's something that's part of the loan parent company guarantee that was part of the original procurement of the contract. And what MERS have been doing over the last
excellent, Convener. Healthy scrutiny, clarifies the situation. and it's also obviously a healthy situation that I anticipated, but it was always, I think it's our duty to ask questions in these and get them clarified. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor Morgan. We appreciate your questions and the opportunity to answer them. There are no other questions demonstrated in the chat bar, and I can't see any indicating. So the recommendations, colleagues, are outlined on page 15. There are 3 recommendations, all for noting. Can we note those, please? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4 now, which we find on page 35. I'm giving the pages, that's to help me find the pages in these loose leaf committee papers. I hope it's of assistance to yourselves as well. So we're in page 35. Pamela, we're coming to the update on the open market purchase scheme.
Thanks, convener. Morning, everyone. Yeah, this is the 6-monthly update that we do to committee in terms of the progress with the open market purchase scheme, or the buyback scheme as we refer to it. And this provides the position as at the end of the last financial year. So the outcome was that we managed to complete purchase of 106 new homes for new supply during that period. So overall, given the restrictions and the various lockdowns that we had, I think that was probably quite a significant achievement to get the 106. It's also put us in a strong position in terms of the current financial year, where we had a bit of a backlog in terms of the interested properties or interested owners in selling their properties to us that are currently being surveyed now that the restrictions have eased. So we've already settled 5 in the current financial year, and we've got approximately 60 out getting surveyed at the moment, and there's a further 11 due to be settled and at legal at the moment. So we're already in a strong position in the current financial year. And just for members' interest, out of the 106, just over half of those were in flatted accommodation, and of those 14 have given us full ownership of blocks, which is always advantageous in terms of progressing repairs, and a further 26 have given us majority ownership of blocks, so again, which is going forward. So I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Thanks very much, Pamela. Very positive and welcome report. I'm sure you'll agree. I've got a couple of questions coming in. Councillor Beveridge, can I come to you first, please? Councillor Beveridge, you're still on mute. Can I ask you to come on?
Sorry, my apologies, Convener. Very welcome report. I know Katrina and her team does a hang of a lot of work there. Pamela, can you tell me how long does the process take from buying until the council take ownership of it and start their renovation works? Thanks.
In terms of how long from when the owner first contacts us?
Yeah.
I mean, it obviously varies. I mean, it's a bit, and the last year was probably, as you can imagine, quite unusual, where it took longer, probably in some cases to settle properties for a whole variety of reasons. So it can be relatively quick in terms of us processing the application when it comes in, if it's of interest to us, and the surveyors getting out to survey it. That's probably the main area where there's some time taken. And then it goes to legal. It just varies, councillor, in terms of there can be legal issues in terms of titles and so on. Sometimes they have to get documentation around building warrants and things, and that can hold it up. So it can be several months from the initial inquiry to the completion of the sale, and then thereafter it gets passed through Brian's team in terms of progressing any repairs works that are required. But I think on average, we're the repair turnaround is on average maybe about between 30 days or so. So there's it depends how much work's required in them. So I'm afraid it varies. That's the short answer.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. Can I come to Councillor Goldie, please, now?
Thanks, Convener. It's just really to ask if the houses that we're buying back are in areas where we have high levels of council stock. And just to see, is there any pattern why these properties are becoming available?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you can probably see from the areas where you know, the highest purchases have been, and you know, if you look at that across, you know, probably over the last few years, then it has tended to be in areas where we've got higher levels of council stock, and that, I suppose, word of mouth as well in terms of people being interested in selling the properties has resulted in us getting higher demand or higher interest from those areas. I have to say, though, we are also proactive in terms of looking at what's for sale on the open market. So we don't just rely on people coming to us. We also look, particularly in the higher demand areas, so Cumbernauld, obviously, and the Northern Corridor, where possibly, you know, the house sales, there's higher demand, and people maybe feel that they can get more if they go onto the open market. But we will look at what's you know, on currently for sale on the open market, and we will, where possible, try and see if we can buy some of those properties. But we probably have a lower success rate sometimes, because, as I say, people often feel that they don't want to take the council's offer and they think they can get more by going in the open market.
Thanks. Can I come to Councillor Burgess?
Just on the point
sorry,
of the, do we know why? Is it just people selling up, or is it properties that are abandoned or maybe deceased or whatever? Do we know why?
Yeah, all of those. A lot of the ones where people come to us, it can be that they've maybe inherited a property, and they you know, they basically just want something that's straightforward, a kind of straightforward sale. Quite often the properties, I think in the report we separate out the number that have come through what was the old empty home scheme, which was kind of longer term empty properties, and so a number maybe have been lying empty for some time, and people, as I say, for various reasons not been able to deal with them. So again, the council, that can be a kind of a good route for people in those circumstances. But often it's just, as you say, just people who are moving on to something else, and you know, see it as an opportunity. We pay open market value, so you know, it's as good to come to the council as it is to sell it in the open market.
Thanks, Pamela. Councillor Burgess now, please.
Thanks, convener. Pamela, it's good to see we got some 4 apartments back into the system as well. That was quite good to know it. But could I ask on the commercial unit side of things, are we still involved in trying to get commercial units in the high street to convert? And can you give us a wee update on that?
Yeah, we don't tend to deal with them so much under this scheme, and but we are looking at that, as you probably know, under linked to the town centre regeneration proposals, where if you know that there's commercial premises that might be suitable for that, then we would look at potentially taking them forward. And we've got a number at the moment but they've been former NLP properties where there's commercial units above, as you say, a shop unit on the ground floor, and we're the new supply team are converting the units above into residential flats that will be let as part of the stock. So it's a relatively small scale at the moment, but theoretically, yes, we would look at those. I think fair to say we're probably less enthusiastic about the sort of ground floor ones, and less, depending on its location, they may be less suitable, you know, for residential accommodation, and obviously we would need to check with Housing Solutions in terms of whether they feel they would be happy, you know, to take those types of units. But yeah, it's certainly a possibility.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burgess. I'm seeing no other questions or indications of wanting in at this stage. So the recommendations are on page 35. There's 2 of them to note. Can we do that, colleagues? Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 5, it's the future new build site. Always a very welcome report on page 39. Pamela, back to yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks, convener. So obviously this is now focusing more on in terms of the new build side of the new supply programme, and we're obviously always keen to try and make sure we've got new sites coming forward that we can add to the programme, and as you know, it takes some time to then do the relevant investigations on these sites and to develop the proposals. So we want to make sure we've got a good pipeline. So as the report says, at the moment, there's nearly 800 homes have been completed through the new build programme, and we've got nearly 200 on site at the moment, and we've got sites for a further just over 1,200 homes that are at various stages of development across North Lanarkshire. So this report is just asking approval to add another 2 sites, 2 council-owned sites onto the programme at 2.1 Calderrig Place and the former Petersburn Primary School in Airdrie, and also to highlight the potential purchase of 24 homes. This is under the Pathfinder initiative that the committee have previously approved, where we can buy or seek to purchase completed homes on the open market out with the existing affordable housing policy areas in the north. So this is the first potential development of that type, and that's at Lorne Place and Coatbridge. Obviously, the final acquisition price is still currently being finalised, and that would be reported in the normal way through the Finance and Resources Committee. So happy to take any other questions. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Pamela. Can I come to Councillor Valentine in the first instance, please?
Thanks, Chair. I note the Lorne Place and Coatbridge one. We're having 12 terrace houses and 12 flats. Now, at the moment, as far as I know anyway, all our own new build stuff, we're not building flats anymore. So I was just wondering why we're taking 12 terrace houses and 12 flats. And on the back of that, to what standard are they up to? When we're talking over the page on this, it suggests at 4.3 that due to technology and all the rest, that we're putting fibre to the premises into all our new build. We obviously can't tell a new developer to come up to our standards, but what do we have in place to make sure that they come up to the standards that we're building our new stock to ask them to bring it up to the same kind of standard? Thanks.
Thanks, Pamela.
So on the first point about flats, yeah, we are building flats at the moment. So it obviously depends on what the need is in that particular location, and what we feel would meet that local need. So there are flats currently being built. So for example, I think at Christon, and they will be specifically suitable for older people. So they will have lifts and balconies as well. So there's not a you're right, we didn't obviously build up to very recently. It was all back and front doors or 4 in a block. So this is quite a new development for us to start building flats. And some of the town centre sites, as you can imagine, are obviously going to be flatted and more suitable for flats. So we are doing that at the moment. In terms of the off-the-shelf purchases, then yeah, the standards, we will basically give them and tell them what standards we expect, and it's for the developer to see whether or not they will meet those. So we would only agree purchases where they meet our standards. It might not be, as you say, the absolute full standard that we have, but it will be very close to our current standards. I'd need to double check about the fibre to property, but I'm pretty sure that, as I say, that's one of our requirements that we would insist on. So bottom line is that the houses will still meet the council's requirements, and that would include, as you say, housing for varying needs and accessibility standards and the same. But as I say, I just need to absolutely double check about the fibre to property, but I'm pretty sure that will be included as well.
Thanks for that, Pamela. Can I come to Councillor Beveridge now?
Thanks, Convener. Pamela, see the new building Petersburn and the new building in the Sykeside area. Are they the areas been identified? I take it because of the amount of applications and inquiries there is for houses in that area. Is that correct?
Yeah, so any site that we're proposing to bring forward, you know, we need to satisfy ourselves with the Housing Solutions team that there is need and demand at that location on that, you know, for housing, and obviously then what the housing mix should be on that site. So obviously, particularly in Coatbridge, given the scale of the reprovisioning programme at the moment, there is a need for additional stock, you know, to help deliver on the reprovisioning programme. Although obviously that, as the next report I think will outline, that's going very well. But you know, we're always looking at potential opportunities to identify more sites to support that programme, as well as in the other areas to support existing needs. So yeah, we would only put forward a site if it was confirmed there was a need for housing in that area.
Right, thanks. Just come back in 1 second. So as I said, I take it that's based on the list, the housing list for the area then, for the different areas. That's how you identify where the houses want to get built, a requirement for a build in that area, is that right?
Yeah, well, broadly speaking, we would, so where there's a potential site or an opportunity, then we would contact the area office and ask them to confirm. So we'll look at the demand, as you say, from the waiting list and other factors, but we'll also liaise with the area office, because, as you know, sometimes, you know, the waiting list doesn't tell the full story either. So it's not just about the waiting list, it's about the local intelligence and the area office and the area teams in terms of what the localised need and demand is, particularly when it comes to specialist type housing. So, you know, wheelchair units and the like. So as I say, it's not absolutely just about, you know, the waiting list. It's about the local knowledge that the teams have as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Coming now to Councillor D'Amato.
Thanks, Chair. Just to ask a little bit more info, 2.1 on the two sites proposed for the new builds in Airdrie and St Newton Petersburg. Just to ask basically what we expect. I understand obviously there's we're at the start of the process, but what kind of house types do we expect to go on those two sites? Is there any sort of mix, or are we expecting it all to be, you know, flats or terraced or whatever? And secondly, timescale on the two sites, what we would expect the timescale to be, basically in terms of the start and complete.
Yeah, so the first one, in terms of the mix, that, as you say, that's not, I think, been finalised yet. And again, that's a process that we would go through with the area office in terms of agreeing the mix. I would be suggesting that on those two sites that it's unlikely there would be sort of flatted, walk-up flatted type accommodation. So I think it would be more our standard mix for a site, or for these types of sites, which is usually a range of semi-detached. Some we always, where it's appropriate for the site, would put wheelchair accommodation on the site, and probably a mix of cottage flats as well. So I would say, without knowing exactly what's possibly been discussed with the area office, that would be the typical mix on these types of sites. And I think that's what would be proposed here. But if there's further information available on that, I'll ask the team to send you that. In terms of the start and completion dates, I wouldn't like to hazard at the moment. As I say, there's already 1,200 or potentially 1,200 units across a number of sites, all at various stages. So as soon as these sites are approved, or assuming they're approved today, then we progress around site investigation and other checks. And then we'll progress in terms of the design development. So it can, you know, some of the sites, you know, can be brought forward quicker depending on what any issues that are identified, and others maybe take a bit longer. So they will just be added to the programme and progress just as quickly as possible. But I wouldn't be able to give you a start or completion date at this point.
Thanks very much, Pamela. We'll need to invest in a crystal ball, because I'm sure we all want to know when the developments are happening in our communities. Councillor Gourley, I see you indicating. I've got a couple in the chat bar. I'll come to you and then I'll come to those in the chat bar. Councillor Gourley, please.
I hope you can hear. I'm hoping I'm asking the question at the appropriate time. But I'm wondering, when we do capital programmes such as renewing bathrooms, kitchens, etc., is there help or grants available to people who have bought their council houses but not have the ability to bring their house up to the standard that we bring our houses up to? Is there any help out there for those people?
We'll go into detail on that, Councillor Gourley, in the next report. If you would mind just holding your containment to there. The answer is yes, there is help available, and we can give you some detail as we get to the subsequent reports. So if I can come to Councillor McLaren now, please.
Thanks, Convener. Pamela, you mentioned how you're building houses with lifts in Muirhead. Is that the Charlton Home site? Because we've not had, all I've had into that is the amount of houses it's going to have wheelchair access and different things, but they've never told us anything about lifts being installed in these houses. Is that the site?
Yeah, I'll make sure that I'll get them to send you the details, Councillor McLaren, but there's that site, and there's also one in Wishaw, so I'll make sure that they send you the,
that's great.
The detail.
It's coming on fine. It looks absolutely fantastic, but I wasn't aware that there were going to be lifts in those houses. But that's brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor McLaren. Come to Councillor Morgan now, please.
Thanks, Convener. It's always positive, Convener, to see a report that comes here with former school sites that, rather than sit and go into decay, are up for development. And what I would say is, Councillor Beveridge was touching on this, I thought, slightly. To point out to Pamela in that department, there are various school sites throughout North Lanarkshire, certainly in other parts of Airdrie, that have sat for over a decade that maybe they could get a look at, because some of these have only become vacant recently, and I'm delighted to see they're getting developed. There's one, for instance, up in Caldercrooks. It's been 12 years it's sat, and various approaches have been made to have a look at that. And what I would say is, we should not proceed just on the demand factor. That should not be the only criteria we use. You increase supply in an area, because I'm concerned about the concentration of increased demand in urban areas being addressed. We've also got to increase supply in outlying areas, but that is the issue of increasing the sites. The specifics of this report, can I ask for clarification on the differential of why one of the three sites has been referred to for evaluation to the Finance Committee, and I look forward to sitting there to see how much the acquisition price for the Lawrence Place in Coatbridge is proposed to be. But we really need to get clarification on this. There seems to be inconsistency just now on how sites are evaluated and the price we get for them. At the last Finance Committee, I asked questions on the valuation of a site that was in council ownership and it went between departments. It was astronomical for the price of a football park. Can I ask clarification at this stage? As the parent committee that deals with new build, how do we evaluate? What formula is used? Because there was a clear contradiction in different sites for house build, that certain evaluations were getting done by the district valuer, which is almost the gold standard. We've always been told, take it out of your hands, put it to the district valuer. But other sites are being done by a different measure. How do we then decide? What is the deciding criteria? Whether a site should be evaluated by the district valuer, an external body, purely objective, compared to some sites being evaluated internally, that leads to questions from people like myself that want answers to this, to make sure that nobody's losing out and no, shall we say, overpricing is taking place. And I'm not saying that's taking place intentionally, but unintentionally. How do we stay objective, professional, by keeping things in-house when we're always told it should go to an outside party to evaluate objectively?
So just to clarify, in terms of the Lauren Place development, what goes to the the Finance and Resources Committee is the acquisition price for the individual units. So it's similar to the where we buy any houses from developers under the affordable housing policy. Again, that the purchase price for those houses is negotiated by our estates team, who's obviously suitably qualified and in terms of the undertaking such valuations. So they are, we appoint them, or they work on our behalf in terms of agreeing those prices. So those types of transactions have always gone to that committee, and that's obviously as part of the council's policy in terms of acquisitions and disposals. In terms of the land valuation, again, for the council, where we're transferring sites between general fund and HRA, or indeed vice versa occasionally, then it's the estates team that would work to identify the valuation for the site, and we then, as the new supply team, would then identify what, if any, what we call abnormal costs are associated with that site once we kind of get into it in terms of site investigations, and quite often, as you know, in North Lanarkshire, there's significant costs associated with developing a lot of these sites, particularly the brownfield sites and the ones that were maybe former school sites. So very often those costs, are quite significant, and they would come off what's the headline valuation. So the actual transfer price, the price that the HRA pays to general fund, can quite often be quite relatively low in terms of recognising the development costs on those sites. But it is the estates team who would undertake that. I don't think we've used the DV, or we wouldn't need to use the DV in those types of cases. The estates team are suitably qualified to do that.
Well, I'll go back and check my notes, convener, on the Finance Committee, because that was the reason I asked the question. Is that in some reports they were using the district value. I see the convener sitting here, but it's not that. That's a separate committee. I'll go back and check my notes. Once again, I'll raise it at Finance, because unless I'm misreading my reports, I'm quite sure that there was district value deployment to evaluate sites in the last Finance Committee. But I'll check it out rather than hold back proceedings today. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Sorry, convener, just to come back though, I was referring to the new supply sites specifically. So it may well be that the DV is used in other circumstances, but it was the new supply sites I was referring to.
Because ultimately it will depend on who owns the site, and from where and from whom we are purchasing. But hopefully you'll get that clarity with continuity of answer between committees. Councillor Morgan. Councillor Castles, can I come to you, please?
Thanks, Heather. Can I ask a question about the council-owned sites that are used for house building? Say, for example, the old school sites. Are they all evaluated for the potential of building council houses, or are some just simply sold off without an evaluation? Is every site evaluated first to see if it can be used for housing? I know some of the school sites have been sold off to private developers. What's the process for that?
So normally any site that is going to be potentially declared surplus in the council would be available for other services to express an interest in. So we would normally any sort of council-owned sites, so like the former school sites, would be available for us to evaluate in terms of suitability for, or demand, or whatever the criteria would be to look at whether that was going to be suitable for council housing or not. Sometimes in some areas we've already got other sites in those immediate areas, and there's already quite a lot in the pipeline. So the circumstances will vary depending on the site by site, and obviously depending on the demand for housing at that location. So that's a key criteria. But yeah, in short, yes. If it's a council site and it's going to be surplus, then it is available for all services, not just the new supply, but it would be potentially available for us to look at that for the new supply programme.
Thanks very much, colleagues. I'm not seeing any intimation of further questions on this report. The recommendations are on page 39 Can we approve the inclusion of the sites that are detailed within this report? Thank you very much, colleagues. We are moving on now to the Tower Strategy update on page 45. Stephen, am I coming to yourself first?
Hi, convener. Sorry, no, it's Brian first.
Brian first. Okay, thank you. I always get that round the wrong way every time. Brian.
Thanks, convener. Just an update. Again, we bring this report twice yearly to committee to inform you of the progress. So, section 2 of the report talks about the progress. 2.1 is to do with the making the properties vacant, suitable, so we can go in and demolish them. Stephen can talk about that. As far as the demolition programme itself goes, excuse me, towers at Whole Hills and Airs are now demolished, which included 3 towers of Merrick, Pentland and Cheviot, and there's been significant site remediation. Works are now underway at Coat Bridge at Burnside Court to demolish that tower, and that should be complete by the end of the calendar year. The project to demolish both the roller eyes and the tower blocks in Gowthrapple are underway, with a phased approach being taken to allow for planned decants, which Steve will talk a wee about later. Phase 2 of the demolition programme is currently being evaluated with the findings of the structural investigation, and including demand analysis of available housing for reprovisioning being considered, and a report will come to a future committee for consideration by elected members on the proposed future phasing. Sprinkler fire safety programme. As you're aware, we completed a fire installation in Birkshaw last year, and we're now on site at 3 further towers in Motherwell, Burnside Lodge and Doonside. The design for phase 2 for Glassford, Woodside, Glen, Coltswood and Redbridge form part of the phase 2, and consultation plans are now being developed. Fire stopping, fire door stop programme was obviously put on hold as a result of the COVID implications, but it's restarted again. We are due to completion hopefully the summer of this year. 81% complete, as I say. We're Brandon Tower next in the programme to receive installations. Smoke detection to meet the Scottish Government targets has been progressing well, with 21 towers complete, and hopefully the rest will be completed within the timescales as agreed by the Scottish Government for February 2022. Emergency lighting upgrade are now complete. The 4 towers refurbishment in Coat Bridge continues, and as I said, structural surveys are still at 97% complete, and they will recommence once the Scottish Government restrictions are eased, which they did do in April 26. And in the meantime, the consultants have issued a report which outlines initial findings of structural survey assessments, and again, the final report will be updated once additional survey results become available. Stephen, pass over to you now.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, just very briefly, the overall reprovisioning is going really well. There has been no security breaches. We've said before at committee, we strip everything out the empty flats, and we make it quite clear there's nothing of value. But it's actually May of 2018 when committee approved this, the original reprovisioning report. So we're 3 years into a 5-year programme. We're actually ahead of schedule in terms of updated figures that Brian gave you. Jackson Court, one of the big towers in the centre of Coat Bridge, is actually 75%. So although the overall site is saying 57 on your report, Jackson Court is actually 75% empty. And Corsington is actually over 75% empty now as well in Motherwell. And the Gowthrapple low-rise are actually sitting at 80% now. And Coat Bridge back flats at Shawhead are actually sitting nearly at 75 or at 75%. So the overall project is going really well. No security breaches. The sites are still secure for the people who are staying in them, and we continue to meet with the remaining residents and tenants to make sure we get good housing options for them and we get good housing outcomes for them. So again, for Brian and myself, happy to take any questions, convener.
Thanks very much, Stephen and Brian. I think we've got to commend the efforts of all of the teams involved in this, and making really, to make transformative policy is putting words, but we actually need officers to carry out the actions and the deeds to make this happen, and our ambition is being realised here, and that's great to see. I'll come to Councillor Castles first, please.
Thanks, Heather. It's just a question about the High Court, Jackson and Dunbeth. Just superficially, you can see where they are. Because of their location, I imagine they provide much more technical difficulties when all the flats are emptied with the demolition. What is envisaged about the timescales would be from the flats are empty till the actual process of seeing the flats being demolished, and when would that be engaged after the last tenant leaves?
The timescale for Beth and Jackson has been kind of, I think we recommended last year just to reverse that for Corsington drafting programme. So it's 24, I think it's 24, 25 for those ones. I need to check the programme again, but I'll go back to you independently on that, Councillor Castles. The timescale between them finishing and moving out, we try to keep it short as possible. And at this point in time, it will be slowed down a wee bit. I think, Stephen, you'll be able to comment on that further, because we've actually moved the programme around a wee bit.
Councillor Castle, sorry. Obviously, the housing team and the property team continue to be in dialogue, because as it's fluid in terms of people accepting offers and moving. They three towers in the middle of Coatbridge are very technical in terms of the demolition of them. The whole house towers sat in a big bit of open ground and were fairly easy to come down. Corsington, Drafton and Allen are the same in Motherwell, right on the main road there. It'll be technically difficult to come down. So between the two teams just now, as this moves every month, we get reports every day, not just every month, in terms of the movement, how many people are coming out. You stay in Coatbridge, you'll probably see at night, actually. It's incredible to see. When you drive there and it's dark now and you hardly see, I'm saying 75%, I drive there and I actually think, geez, it's actually more than that. You don't see very many lights on in the towers just now, and it's the same over at Drafton and Corsington. So just to give the reassurance, the two teams are constantly working together, and if we've got to bring forward the demolition or put something back, then again we'll report to committee and do that. They're already on site, as you know, from Coatbridge and Burnside Court, but it won't come down to later on in the year, because a lot of work gets done internally to do the full strip out before it comes down. So there'll be substantial actually internal works that will be carried out on the sites before the actual tower blocks come down. But again, we'll ensure that we update committee and update local members in terms of the progress and the timescales, that whether they come forward or whether we have to put them back slightly.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Certainly, it was excellent to be out at Whole Hills just a week or so ago, just to see the sheer transformation of that site. Not just the skyline that's changed, it's the groundworks and everything that's going on as well. So it's great to see how they're evolving quickly and continuously. Councillor Valentine, come to yourself now.
Thanks, Chair. 2 points on it. On the demolition stage, Birkshaw and Allershaw seem to be well below the percentage-wise of everything else we're doing. Is there a particular reason for that? And in 2.4, the Phase 3 survey is at 97% complete, and obviously Scottish Government restrictions are now easing. The final report will be updated once the additional survey results become available. Where will the results of that survey come? Will they come to this committee, or will they be kept internal? Because there's a potential there for them, if there's serious issues, to cause concern for people who stay in towers. So what's the process once that Phase 3 survey is complete? Thanks.
I'll pick up the first point in terms of demolition and the reprovision for Birkshaw and Allershaw. Allershaw Tower, Councillor Valentine, is an amenity tower. So about 20 years ago, we redesignated that tower for over 60s living, and the guarantee we gave at the time was that we would actually build another amenity housing complex. So that was the only one that we've got sufficient space in Gowthrapple, and we're designing, working with Pamela and that team to actually build I can't remember, it was 25 to 30 units up there. So we haven't actively been pursuing rehousing options for the tenants in Allershaw or the tenants in Birkshaw that are over 60, because there's going to be a complex built for them. And that's why that one appears to be behind. It's not. It's been planned that we will build a new shelter house or a new amenity complex for them, and the existing residents or the remaining residents will transfer and move into the new site.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll pick up on the second part of that question, Councillor Valentine. The report, I've already seen the first version of the report, the draft report, and just to assure you, the consultants are not reporting anything overly concerning. And if you may remember back a couple of years after Phase 2 survey, we reported on the findings of that report and the issues that was coming out of it, and what we were going to do in terms of the fire stopping and the fire doors and any remedial structural works which have been done. So yes, the report will come to myself and the team, and we'll discuss it, and then we'll decide which other elements of work need to be done. As you remember, way back at the start of this, we've got two types of construction. Well, we've got three. We've got LPS, which is large panel systems, which are built like a box of cards, and manufactured off-site and carried on the site and put together. And we've got monolithic construction, which is cast in situ, concrete being shuttered and poured on site. And they've both got different characteristics in terms of being able to withstand accidental loadings from a fire or an explosion. So we're working through it. We've only got 1 tour to finish off the surveys in, and it's quite, the surveys are quite destructive. So we really need voids to go in and do this work, and it's difficult to get voids in the right area because sometimes you need one above or one below and then maybe one adjacent. So we're only looking for another couple of properties to complete that whole process. But I can assure you today there's been no major concerns brought to us by the consultants in terms of their findings.
I hope that gives comfort to all in the committee, particularly yourself, Councillor Valentine. Councillor Gurley, I'm seeing you with your hand up. You got a question here, please? Can you put your mute off, please, Mary? Still can't hear you.
That's it now, Heather.
That's it. You're a bit quiet, Mary, so use your loud projecting voice, please.
That's for the Waynes, Heather. On the last point, I've asked the question if there was any help for people who had bought their council houses. When we're doing a regeneration programme, our houses are more upgraded on the capital programme. Then is there help for these people who have already purchased council houses but not have the finance to upgrade their houses? Now, I'm sure Heather said that there was help available. Would you have that information, Stephen? Or I can get it at a later date off you if you haven't.
Mary, item 7's got some more detail on that, but I don't know if there's if it's relevant for anybody to come in with anything else just now. But yes, there is assistance for owners and ownership paper that's coming. The common repairs paper will provide you more detail with that. That's item 7.
Could I come in again, Heather, if he doesn't mind? How are we progressing for the flats at Allen Street? There's a lot of work going on there in the high flats.
Allen Street, that'll be Mulberry and Glen.
Mulberry and Glen.
Yeah, that's the site for it's in the report under 2.3, Councillor. The external works, we're doing a lot of work down there. We're doing those two as it's lot 2 of the contract, and lot 1 is Blair Grove and Mirison, and there's major overhauls getting done there. So the programme was delayed, obviously as a result of COVID, but we're back on site and we're progressing the works to completion, hopefully at the end of this calendar year. But obviously we've got to weigh up all the delays that we've encountered between now and the pandemic. So we're working with the contractor just now to establish an end date for those contracts. But the works have restarted since April 26, internally and externally.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm not seeing any other indications of questions, colleagues. So the recommendations are on page 45. There's 4 of them and they're all to note. Can we note those recommendations, please? Thank you very much. Item 7 has been eagerly anticipated by Councillor Gurley and I'm sure the whole of the committee. Many of us took part in a series of presentations from Lorna Patrick, who supported is bringing us up to speed on the detail of this. Brian, are you here or is Lorna going to take the...
No, you'll not be hearing my dulcet tones in this one. We're leaving that with resident Petricelli, Lorna. So Lorna did a very good job in the presentation. So Lorna's going to take us through the report and hopefully answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay. And Lorna, as a participant, I know that a lot of members found it very useful and informative. And so thank you very much for that. And if anybody hasn't received the slides, I'm sure Lorna will be delighted to circulate that information to you. So Lorna, can I take you for item 7, please?
Okay, thank you, Convener. The report is basically just update committee on the potential routes for progressing works for platted blocks, including owner occupiers in those blocks. It gives a bit of background into the right to buy and how many flats were sold potentially in North Lanarkshire. And it also explains about the title deeds obligations when somebody buys a house and what areas. In terms of flatted accommodation, there are obligations on owners with regards to common elements, and everybody should be aware of them. The report gives some indication of the type of title deeds that are in place in North Lanarkshire. There's generally 3 types, and there's ones which are in the ex-Monklands area, there's ones that are ex-Motherwell area, and there's ones that are in Cumbernauld, and there's slight differences between them. The report gives some of the details. The report also indicates that there's been a reinstatement of granted for certain elements as of February 2021 by committee, and that's approximately £150,000 each year for 2 years at this point in time. As the convener said, we did briefing sessions. There was 3 briefing sessions, and I appreciate a number of you were at them, that gave more indication of detail as to what the report was actually going to say. I understand those slides are available through the members committee. I understand that Pauline has already made them available, but if anybody wants them, or if anybody wants anything else, if they just contact me, I'll make sure that they get them separately. The report indicates about the routes to undertake works in such blocks where there are owners, and basically it states that there is always an obligation on anybody, no matter whether it's the council or another owner, to comply with the requirements of the title deeds. The title deeds generally tell you who has to do stuff, who has to pay for stuff, how much they have to pay for stuff, but they don't actually say how do you progress things. So somebody has to take the lead. And what we generally, because the council has at least one property in a block, the council generally takes the lead, because a lot of the situations is it's our tenants that have maybe complained about an item. It's the same responsibility on any owners. Any owner has the right to progress works and propose them to the other owners in the block. The council simply does that when it's taking forward works. What the report says is that generally where we're progressing with works, we always look initially for voluntary agreement by the owners. It's a courtesy thing to begin with, and it's saying if you can, this is what we would like to do. However, the report also indicates that in certain circumstances, depending on the types of works, if it's essential works, we may look at certain other legal routes that are available to us. These can be split into routes that are available to us as an owner, and they also indicate some other routes that are available to us as a council as a statutory action. So the first one that it indicates, and this is the one that we would probably try to use the most, is a tenement management scheme decision. A tenement management scheme decision relates to a vote of all owners with regards to certain works. It can only be essential works, it can't be classified as improvement works, and the report provides some details in terms of which ones would be thought of as improvement and which ones would be thought of as essential works. As I said, you have a vote, and what happens is if the majority of owners agree to certain works, then the vote is carried and the work can be progressed by the person who was actually proposing them, which is generally the council. What happens in those kind of circumstances is that people have the right to complain to a sheriff if they don't agree with the decision that's made. But if there's no report to a sheriff within 28 days of the decision being made and the owners being notified, then the works can progress. There are other routes that are available if that wasn't available, because one of the issues with a scheme decision is that there is no casting vote arrangement. That means if 4 owners wish something and 4 owners don't wish something or don't vote, it cannot be progressed. So if something was thought to be serious enough, there are other actions that are available for the council in a statutory role, which would involve works notices, a defective notice, or a dangerous buildings notice if that was thought appropriate. All those are available, but they are as a statutory action as opposed to carrying out anything in relation to just being an owner of another property. So the report summarises that wherever possible, we would always ask for voluntary agreement for owners, but if not feasible, we would look at these other options if the works were felt appropriate to take them forward. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Lorna. As I say, that was a synopsis of what we got at the training session, which was substantially more detailed. What I'm not going to do at committee today, folks, is rerun the training session. But if there are any pertinent questions, please feel free to ask them now. Councillor Gourley, is that your hand still up?
Yeah, if you don't mind, Heather, how long does it take if private owners refuse to do what we want them to do? Is it a long process? Would the work be held up? Can we go ahead with the work without their consent, or do we need to wait till we go through a long process of getting them to agree, even if they still don't agree?
The problem that I'm going to have is that I'm going to say it depends on the situation. It depends on what it's actually required to be done. As I said, there are certain elements that we can do. There are emergency situations, depending on what happens. There's emergency situations with regards to, you can do what's called an emergency TMS, or if it was serious enough, there would be a dangerous buildings notice that would be available to put onto it. So without knowing a specific case, I can't say what would happen. There are some, as I said, that we would go through a TMS decision if it was thought to be essential works, and then it would be on the basis of a majority. However, the report indicates that if the works are deemed as improvement to a property, it needs full agreement of every owner before you could actually undertake them. So without knowing a certain circumstance and a certain case, I couldn't give you an answer as to what would happen, because it depends. Every situation can be different. That's all I would say.
Thanks very much, Lorna. Councillor Goodley, could I ask you to liaise with Lorna for specific advice? If
that would be very helpful.
Because I think it might be give direction to yourself and some others in your locality.
That would be helpful.
I know that you've got very particular things in mind. Councillor Morgan.
Thanks, Convener. Let me point out, Convener, I'd originally intended to get to the last of the presentations, but a family funeral that appeared that week meant I didn't get to it. That said, I did subsequently, as Lorna knows, read in detail the reports that come out. And what you're right in saying today, it would be churlish, it would be selfish of me to try and go through all that report. But what I would seek clarification on is an aspect that refers to, I think we've got a responsibility to look at the impact that this problem has on our 36,000 tenants. I know that maybe I should declare an interest in this one, but I sympathise with the staff and how complicated this is. And if you're reading the full report and added it to the overheads that come out, this has been inherited by previous authorities that should get their backsides kicked. Legal departments and previous authorities were totally remiss in the way this was handled. And I sympathise with staff, Lorna heads it up, various others, trying to get some sort of form of, balance and fairness in this particular area. I live it on a daily basis. I won't get into the specifics on an individual case anymore than that at this state. But I do think we'll have to get a perspective in this. A perspective of where the owners, not just refusing to participate in common repairs, owners are picking up in Bucksea services. And it's in the report, I think it's page 52, the bottom of page 53, a plethora of services that owners in communal areas, we've all got them. So I don't think we should be accelerating this. We're the landlord, we've got the responsibility to address this, where owners in communal areas, not just closes, are benefiting from a plethora of Bucksea services that are getting paid by tenants. People are asking questions about what the owners going to get. Tenants are actually subsidising owner-occupied in various areas. If we need money in to address this, why are we continuing to take up the astronomical costs of some of these general services? Grass cutting, communal lighting, mile upon mile of maintenance and repair and metal fencing. It's not churlish. It's not localised. It runs into millions of pounds. That is a subsidy from the HRA to the non-HRA. Doing a bit of walking as we're all doing now, but you don't need to go far to see these areas. But owners are sitting in there benefiting from these services. I stay in one, I represent one, Councillor Beveridge will tell you, Plains, Crooks, Clarkson, owners sitting in there contributing nothing. Now, rather than going into the complications of that quagmire of the legal difficulties here. I think it's responsible of a responsibility of us as a landlord to look at this and say, no, this can't continue. We need the contribution from people that are benefiting from services to go into a general budget. And why we do not do this, I don't know. Why do we not do a transfer of a calculated portion of funding, transferring it from non-HRA, council tax and other grants that come in, and put it into HRA? The calculation's easy. Stephen Llewellyn can hit a button and know how many gardens, how many owners in an area, and that's a portion to housing. But what I'll say is this, Chair, it's in the report there. There's reference there to what Councillor Gurley's asking about, what's available for owners. The obscenity of council tenants paying rent, and every tenant, 36,000 that we're responsible for, subsidising owner-occupied services and the beneficiaries of that. It's an obscenity that can't continue. Why are we not doing that? When are we going to do it? Because it's a continual drain on housing resources to subsidise those that are benefiting from services that they're not paying for. And there's a cultural issue here. I remember the outcry last year when owners were told, that's your land, we're not maintaining it. What's the cultural issue here? Emails galore. I was expecting one in for David Cameron. The crap had hit the fan. We really got our own culture here and say, no, hold a minute. There's millions of pounds here where the HRA is subsidising owners. They're going to be charged. And I'd like to see that being implemented into this. It won't solve all the problems in here between owner and owner-occupier, but it will implant a bit of balance and fairness from the present situation, whereby it's tenants that we're the landlord of that are being penalised. I'd like to see that progress, Chair.
Indeed, we will do, Councillor Morgan, and thank you for your contribution. And I think you'll note from the training, from the slides that you've received, that the service is constantly evaluating, re-evaluating and considering how it best deploys the resource that we have. We cannot go in and do something to someone's property without their permission, so we have got very strict legal parameters to work within. But yes, we do have to be aware that the HRA should not be resourcing those who are not contributing towards it, and we constantly reflect on that. I'm not sure, Stephen, if there's anything that you would want to say as Head of Housing Solutions on this, because it is an ongoing matter and it is a mosaic approach in many ways because of the previous authorities' variety of approaching housing standards that we are still overcoming the legacy of.
Just to reassure members on the committee, there are strict rules in terms of the use of the housing revenue account, and myself, Brian, Greg, in terms of finance, obviously be adhere to the rules as much as we possibly can. Historically, you can go back where things were being paid from the HRA. The North Lanarkshire Tenant Resident Federation carried out a full audit of the use of the HRA and their rules and regulations last year. And it might be helpful actually to present some of that information to committee at a future date. And again, it was an independent audit by the tenants who, like yourself, Councillor Morgan, who's a tenant, obviously have got that vested interest, and they come back to say they were happy with the information that they were, and we gave them the full information that we do pay. It goes the other way. The HRA actually contributes for the open spaces, so that's done, as you said, it's done in a proportion of council tenancies within an area. So we would pay a certain amount every year in the co-Patterson to that team for the contribution of open plan areas within the housing revenue account, and that team actually maintain that on our behalf. But just to again reassure, and I don't know Brian wants to say, or Greg, but there are strict rules in terms of the use of the HRA, and at all times we will do what we can to adhere to that. The other side, and you've raised it yourself, is sometimes that does penalise tenants. Let's be clear on that. A tenant living in a close, we want the close painted, we can't do it because an owner occupier won't contribute. So that, and this is what obviously Lorna's presenting to you today. So it's a hugely complex and difficult situation to be in, but just to reassure in terms of use of the HRA, it is protected, definitely.
Convener, I'm trying not to bring my own case in, and I'm not doing that. I'm not bringing in the inside. I'm talking about external communal services. I think it's incumbent upon us, because I estimate that this will running into millions of pounds. Can we get a report that gives us the figures for the maintenance, repair, paintwork of external fences around these communal areas, the grass cutting, the communal lighting. There's no information here, and yet it is available. I'm not going into the complications of the obscene recalcitrance of owner-occupiers that won't pay their way, expecting to frustrate the council. I'd expect a report to come up on that, because it's not the tenants and residents that are elected to run this service. It's us as elected members.
Councillor Morgan, you've made the request for a report. We will look into that and bring that to a future committee.
I appreciate that.
As a committee, we are robust in how we look at that, and as you know, we bring forward our housing motion each year for the interrogation of the committee and indeed the full council, and often these items are within that. Every committee has our full financial scrutiny across our services, and folk get the opportunity to do that at every meeting, not just in
So we're getting the report in those areas?
Yes, I've just said that. A report will come to a future committee. Thank you, Councillor. And the recommendations are noted on page 51. Colleagues, can we note those? And thanks again to Lorna for the training. And just to the committee, if you do have specific questions that you want to ask about issues, please get in touch with Lorna and the team to get those responded to. Moving on to item 8 at page 59, it's the homeless related support, the implementation of the Rapid Rehousing Transition Plan Year 3. Stephen, can I come to you, please?
Thanks, Convener. The report on the Rapid Rehousing and Homeless and Related Services is there. It's given an update where we are. In December 2018, the council put forward their plan for North Lanarkshire for a 5-year plan in terms of how we would tackle homelessness, how we would attempt to break the cycle, and the council's vision for the next 5 years in terms of support to homeless applicants and homeless services. Within the report, you'll see some of the innovation innovative partnership that we have been adhering to and implementing in terms of the work we've done with NHS, the work we've done with the health and homeless team, the high resource user project, housing and social work. For the first time in a long time, then all groups are actually working really closely together as a multi-agency has been set up, and the resources are going in for us all to work together rather than individual agencies working in silos, with the intention to ensure homeless people come through, get appropriate services, get a sustainable long-term housing solution, and don't end up with the representation levels that we've had up to date. Just very briefly for committee, there has actually been a 20% reduction in homelessness in North Lanarkshire in the last year, which actually bucks the trend across Scotland. Homelessness has increased across most local authorities in Scotland. Unfortunately, and with regret, and we always knew it would happen, although there's been less cases, there has actually been an increase in the levels and percentage of domestic violence. And a lot of that's been put down to COVID, the number of times people, or the extra time that people are spending in the home. So on a positive, the homeless presentations have reduced. The sustainability levels are much better because of the project. However, there has been an increase in domestic violence. So it normally would run about 15%, and it's currently running at 20%. So 20% of people who are declaring households who are presenting as homeless are given the reason as violence. And again, that's a priority for the partnership then to work and ensure we've got the appropriate supports for people, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Stephen. This has been a very innovative approach, as you say, some very purposeful collaborations, working with some of your most vulnerable across our communities. Are there any questions, colleagues? I'm not seeing any in the chat bar. If not, can we note the recommendations that are at the bottom of page 59? Thank you very much for that. If we can move on now to the Services Covenant Housing Solutions commitment on page 71. Stephen.
Thanks, Convener. I struggled with the word innovation there in the last report, so I'm going to do my best not to use that word in this report. So the report in terms of Armed Services Covenant, I'm going to actually just try and say it. It's a very innovative report. So the report that you've got is looking at our proposals for the Council to meet our ongoing obligations in respect of the Armed Services and the Veterans Covenant and the duties within the proposed Armed Forces Bill that are currently going through the UK Parliament. The report that you've got seeks approval from committee for us to go out to consult with stakeholders around the changes within our allocation policy. The Covenant was introduced to ensure that those who serve or have served in the armed forces as well are not disadvantaged in terms of health, education, housing. And you'll see in the report housing is specifically mentioned. There are actually 28 properties across North Lanarkshire that are managed by the Veterans Association. However, over and above the 28 properties, then there's also a percentage of allocation that go in terms of the 2,500 to 3,000 allocations we make every year. The system at the moment doesn't specifically actually register or record when somebody is in the armed services or has been in the armed services. And you'll see from the report we're asking for us to increase and improve the way we actually record information to make sure that's on our application in the waiting list. And it's also, there's a gap there in terms of the military at the moment are also unable to give us information. So we're looking for a couple of things in terms of the report. So to go out to consult, but also to change how we actually register and record, so we get much better information to come back to committee. And again, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Stephen. The report's before us, colleagues. Are there any questions? Can we note its contents and grant approval for the consultation process? Thank you very much. Moving on now to item 10, which is the approval of commencement of procurement. Brian, can I come to you on this, please?
Thanks, Convener. This is just a standard report seeking committee's approval to commence a procurement for MTC asbestos Hre Monitoring sampling for domestic properties. Just look for committee approval to commence that procurement. Thanks. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any questions. Is committee minded to approve the report? Thank you very much. Moving on now to Greg's suite of financial monitoring reports. The Hre Monitoring Report is first and it's on page 81. Greg.
Thanks, Convener. Morning, everyone. So the first one is the Hre Revenue Monitoring Report, and that's up to period 12, which just takes us to early March. And what we're reporting now is that the service anticipates an Hre outturn underspend of £10.4 million. But what I'll remind the committee is that when we set the Hre budget back in December for 21-22, we had agreed to utilise £7.5 million of that surplus to support 3 of the council's priorities. And that was, just to remind people, I think I put it in the report anyway, so £2.5 million for continued support the Universal Credit Assistance Fund and the Rent Hardship Fund, £2.5 million for energy efficiency measures in homes, and £2.5 million set aside to support the potential for increased repairs demand as we move out of the lockdown restrictions. So a theme that you'll see in all these reports that I'm presenting today is that a major part of the surplus relates to the coronavirus pandemic, and the sort of impact of that in Hre is outlined in Appendix 3. Now, the main part of that is linked to repairs, and as Brian mentioned earlier on, we had a discussion about MERS, because of the restrictions linked to lockdown and the ability for us only to do emergency and legislative works during the height of the lockdown restrictions. We've got an underspend in the repairs programme of £5.7 million, and some of that underspend has been offset by some cost pressures linked to COVID, and that's mainly linked to things like the increased costs of the Universal Credit Assistance Fund and Rent Relief Fund, and a reduction in what we've seen in mainstream rental income. But out with the COVID position, we've highlighted, I think it's Appendix 4, that the service has an underlying underspend of around £6.4 million, and that's largely attributable to the ambition funding. And as you'll know from previous years, some linked to the profile of expenditure between getting the rental income from tenants and the capital expenditure that supports the ambition, there's always a 1-year time lag. So the biggest chunk of that £6.4 million underspend is in relation to that time delay, and that will be carried forward as part of the Hre reserves to ensure that it continues to support the ongoing investment in the new supply programme and the mainstream investment programme. We've also had significant underspends in relation to the service's bad debt provision. Because we've got Universal Credit Assistance Fund and Rent Relief Fund, that support to tenants has reduced what we would have had to make provision for in terms of bad and doubtful debts. And we've also had additional income during the year linked to temporary accommodation, because the amount of turnover that we've had in temporary and homeless accommodation has been less. And the last thing I'm going to note on this report before I open up to questions is just that the service has achieved its savings targets for the year, despite the COVID pandemic. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Greg. Some really important and useful information there. Are there any questions on this item? I don't have anyone in the chat bar for that. No. Can I?
Convener, can I just ask a point of clarification, because there's two figures quoted and I don't know what one's correct. It's a very short question, but that is important. It's in relation to that ambition funding. Apologies for my failure to work this technology. On page 83, the ambition funding is to be carried forward. The figure is 3.5 million. Sorry, 3.5 million. On page 87, it says the figure is to be carried forward for ambition funding is 2.5 million. Can Greg clarify what one is it? Or
Yeah,
what
so
one it is?
Yep. So the figure, so I'm just going to get the paragraph reference again. The figure that's referenced in 2.228 is the current year underspend, Councillor Morgan. The 2.2 figure that's mentioned, or 2. I can't find it, sorry. The 2.5 figure that's mentioned in Appendix 2 on page 87 is last year's underspend in the ambition fund. Right. So that £3.5 million will be added to that 2.5, and we'll have £5 million at the end of this financial year that will be supporting the ambition programme, and that'll be over time by Brian and Stephen's teams.
Thanks very much, Greg. I appreciate that. There are no other questions at this point. There is a recommendation on page 81. It's to note the financial position of the HRA revenue budget. Can we do that, colleagues? Thank you very much. Moving on, Greg, at item 11B, the Enterprise and Communities Revenue Monitoring Report, the non-trading element.
Yep. Thanks, Convener. So at period 12, the service is anticipating an outturn overspend of £7.7 million. So that's a slightly improved position from what we reported at the last committee, and that's linked to government grants that we've received that have offset some of the costs that we've incurred throughout the year. So just in an overall sense, that outturn position has arisen as a result of the COVID impact of £9.6 million worth of cost pressures, and service management action has reduced that by £1.8 million or thereabouts. As I've mentioned at previous committees, the COVID impacts have all largely been out with the services control, and the biggest element of that is linked to loss of income due to the lockdown restrictions. And that's been around £6.7 million in the current financial year. And that's in areas like planning, building standards income, reduced school meal income, and reduced special lift income. All these things are linked to demand for the services. And what we're going to have to do is we sort of continue to wrestle with the COVID pandemic, is continue to monitor the impact of those things as the restrictions ease over time. We've also had a number of additional costs throughout the financial year, and that's measures to support our response, or the Council's response to COVID. And that could be things like improved and increased hygiene measures across the Council's estate, increased staffing requirements to make sure that we've got social distancing in place around fleet and to ensure hygiene standards and cleaning the schools. Then we've had additional fleet costs in relation to having minibuses, if you like, to ensure social distancing, so that the waste collection staff are sharing space in cabs that would be against the COVID restrictions and COVID rules. And we've also seen things like a significant increase in household waste tonnage because of the large-scale move to working from home. But some of these costs have been offset by additional income that we received and reduced costs. So the three sort of main areas are the Council's been able to benefit from the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme. We've had reduced school meal food costs because schools have been closed for significant periods of time, and we've had reduced materials costs in areas like NL Industries. The underlying position for the service, if you exclude COVID, would be an underspend of £1.8 million, and that's been as a direct result of all the heads of service and all the managers across the service taking management action to reduce costs and to control costs to support the Council's objectives of achieving a balanced budget. But obviously, because the Enterprise and Communities is reporting a £7.7 million deficit, at a corporate level, that's been managed through the additional funding that the Council received from the Scottish Government, and through other management actions the Council's taken. And that means that the impact of the overspend that I'm reporting today will be managed and funded corporately. Last thing on this report is just about the savings. So despite the challenges of the last financial year, the service has still managed to achieve 83% of its savings targets in full in the financial year, and the remainder of those savings that haven't been achieved will be have been impacted by COVID, and there are plans in place to implement them on an ongoing basis in the future once we sort of are removed from the COVID restrictions and COVID impact. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Greg. And it's right that there is the burden is shared with a corporate body as opposed to with one substantial series of services because they're the most front facing. So thanks again to all the staff for their efforts in the works that have been taking place over the last 18 months. Colleagues, there are no questions on this report. Anything at this point? No, there is one recommendation on page 91. Can we note that, please? Thank you very much. Moving on to item 11C. Greg, is the trading report.
Yep, thanks, Convener. So very quickly, this is the Council's trading report for up to period 12. And at period 12, we're projecting that the service would fully meet its budgeted surplus target, and that over the 5-year period that we're required to maintain a budgeted surplus, or at least a break-even position, that's on target to be achieved for the service. And I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much. I'm seeing no questions in the chat bar. There is one recommendation on page 103. Can we note that recommendation, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 12A, Greg. It's the Hre Capital Monitoring Report.
Thanks, Convener. So just the recurring theme of the COVID reports. We've got a significant underspend in the Hre Capital mainstream capital programme for the current financial year of £27 million, and similar to the position I presented earlier in relation to the repairs programme in the Hre Revenue Report, the mainstream capital programme has been significantly impacted by COVID-19 lockdown and the continuing restrictions, which thankfully in the new financial year appear to have been removed. Now, given that significant underspend, it's going to be difficult for the service to kind of catch up with that, and for the contractors to catch up with that in 1 year. So what the intention is that will be completed, and it's been reflected in the Hre Mainstream Investment Programme that was approved by this committee back in February, and we'll catch up with that over the remainder of the 5-year period. Similarly, with the new supply and buyback programmes, there are anticipated underspends for the 2021 financial year. There are probably 2 reasons for the new supply programme element. So COVID, as Pam mentioned earlier on, that's caused delays in getting onto sites and stuff like that. But secondly, we're continuing to have the impact of the Scottish Water requirements, which is creating some delays on the programme delivery. And similarly for the buyback scheme, while we managed to meet a significant target of getting over 100 buybacks, the budget that we presented at the beginning of the year assumed slightly more than that. So there's an underspend in that programme as well, but we'll make that good over the remainder of the sort of 5-year programme. Happy to take any questions on that.
Thanks very much. Colleagues, any questions? Councillor Valentine.
Thanks, Chair. Greg, on 2.1.2, the underspend of 27.5 million, just to round it up to make it easier. Where is that sitting? What happens to that? Have we already borrowed through our various borrowing procedures to get that money for the new build, and obviously been unable to spend it due to COVID restrictions? Where is that money sitting? Is it within the council, or has it not yet been borrowed?
So that's a good question, Councillor Valentine. So we've not borrowed for it yet. Technically, we've not borrowed for it. What we've done is we've made the provision for borrowing for it and the costs of that borrowing. So what you'll see next financial year is that we'll have a reduction in our loan charge costs or our borrowing costs next year, because we've not incurred that expenditure. But we only borrow as and when we require it, and that's part of the council's treasury management strategy that's approved through policy and strategy and monitored through the Finance and Resources Committee. So we've not physically borrowed that cash yet, but we would have had the provision there to pay for the borrowing of that. So it's not sitting there. We're not sitting with extra cash in our accounts at the moment. waiting to be spent, but the provision is there to allow for the cost to be incurred.
Thanks very much for that, Greg. I'm sure that everyone found that useful. I'm not seeing anyone else indicating that they want in for a question. So can we note the financial position of the HRA capital programmes, please, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 12B, which is on page 117. Greg, yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. So just a reminder to everybody on the committee that the council had a decision last year at the height of the pandemic that we would curtail all non-essential expenditure. So as a result of that, the Strategic Capital Delivery Group concluded a review of the 2021 capital programme back in July. And that review identified those programmes that were legally committed, essential and deliverable in the current financial year, 2021. And thereafter, the Capital Delivery Group agreed to realign the capital programme to reflect that. So on that revised capital programme, the service is currently forecasting an underspend of £1.6 million, which is almost entirely attributable to the delay in the planned purchase of land linked to the council's schools and centres modernisation programme. But there are a number of other kind of offsetting variances linked to the Asset and Procurement Solutions programme. And we've got a Strategic Capital Delivery Group tomorrow where we'll be, or the recommendation will be that we agree to all these underspends being carried forward into the new 5-year capital programme that was approved back in March, so that there's no impact on service delivery or on programme delivery linked to all these underspends. So that'll be a decision that the SCDG will make tomorrow, and we'll report that as part of the programme monitoring as we move into the new financial year. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I think part of our challenge is of an ambitious council. You know, any delay has impact in how we realise that ambition. But I think there's been an immense amount of work being able to be carried on in the most difficult of times over the last year, and I'm sure projects of importance will carry forward. I'm not seeing any indication of questions on this. So the page 117, there is one recommendation to note the financial position. Can we do that, colleagues? Thank you very much. Nice to see thumbs up and also hear and agree every now and again. Moving on to page 127, it's agenda item 13A, is the new supply programme procurement. Pamela, anything to add to the report?
Thanks, Convener. Just very briefly, this report obviously gives an update on various procurement activity to progress the next phase of the new supply programme, and really the most significant item or where we're seeking approval is the award of the contract to progress the redevelopment of the Whole Hills site and the adjacent land that's up there. So this is the largest ever site that the council's taken forward, up to about 150 units, and that proposal is to award the contract to CCG to progress that work. We're also looking to approve the progress of call-off contracts from the Scotland Excel framework, again to CCG for the BRE site at Ravenscraig and the Gibbs Street site at Chapel Hall. And also to note the award of the call-off contract to Haddons to start work soon at the Northburn site, which again was one of the demolition areas. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Pam. We've got a couple of questions coming in. Councillor Beveridge, can I come to you first, please?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I welcome these new builds. I'm sure most of them, all my councillor colleagues will do as well. I noted last week, Convener, there was a media release where yourself were welcoming this new builds with one of the contractors. Would it not be more prudent for the future to have award colleagues and yourselves there with such media releases at such events? Thanks.
As you know, Councillor Beveridge, that's always been the position that I've taken. But with the plethora of pre-election periods, we had a very short window and a very short notice period to actually get out. But I can confirm, colleagues, as we are releasing sites in your areas, we will be making announcements with you going forward.
Thanks.
Councillor Valentine, you have a question.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of points on 13A. If on 4.2, pages 130 through to 131, there's on page 131, there's number of mandatory outcomes. And that's where I believe the contractors have said, right, well, in outcome one, the Dykehead Road one, there'll be one apprentice, there'll be, sorry, 2 apprentices and such like. And the same on the Northbourne Avenue one. But if you go back to 4.2, the second paragraph, the successful tenders have committed to delivering a range of community benefits, and these are awaited in the final submission. Does that mean that we've got mandatory ones here and we are also going to have voluntary community benefits on top of the mandatory ones for these? Because I'm going to refer to this on 13B as well. And one other question, and it's me being pedantic again, but Appendix 1 for the quality price scores 40% to 60% on one of them, and the other one's quality 70, price 30. Now, I've checked another couple of contracts and the standard appears to be quality 60, 40, price 60. So is the construction in Northbourne on page 135, is that a misprint, or why is it a different quality price score? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much. Pamela, you coming in to answer on?
Yeah, just on the last point, first I'll absolutely double check, but I think these are the 2 separate frameworks. So it would be dependent on what the price quality split was on the relevant framework that we were calling off against, Councillor Valentine. So just let me double check that that's the case, but I think that's the explanation for that. And again, in terms of the wording, I think you're right. The wording is probably not great there in terms of the successful tenderers. I think what when that was written, I think we were still awaiting those final outcomes for Dykehead Road and Northbourne. So I think what's detailed there for Dykehead Road and Northbourne is now the final. That was obviously when the final tender submissions were received. Obviously, we always work with the contractors to better and improve on what they've committed to, but and particularly have to say CCG are quite proactive and particularly strong in this area. But the other areas where we're still awaiting the final tenders means that we're still to finalise what the community benefits will be for those contracts. So particularly BRE, site, Gibb Street, etc. So they're not yet finalised. So it's apologies. It's probably just it's the wording should have been tidied up there.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Pamela. I think there's many of us that have felt in the past that some of the community benefits felt a bit mystical, but I know that the council corporately is working very hard to look at what are the aspirations of communities and what are the things that communities need. Who are our contractors that are winning these substantial these projects and contracts, and how can they assist on the ambitions of community groups, and looking at how that is actually facilitated to make those 2 sets of, the need and the aspiration to come together to fulfil that for communities. So that has been worked on at the moment, and it may be an area that we want to speak about at a future committee, because we're always keen to find out what are these community benefits and who is actually benefiting from them. Councillor Damasio, you've got a question.
Thanks, Convener. It was just, I probably should have come in at the start. It was just to record a declaration of interest as Vice Convener of Scotland XL, because it's referred to in the framework.
Thanks for that, Councillor Damasio. Councillor Morgan.
Thanks, Convener. As was said in the report, or when Pamela or whoever it was talking to us, to say this is the biggest housing project we're doing. It's ironically in my area. Councillor Beveridge asked as a local member, about the press release of this. You know, it didn't follow protocol that local members have dealt with those areas for years. But I can take that. You know, I can understand the enthusiasm to get these out into the public domain. But you know what I can't take? I can't take finding out who's going to be awarded a contract through social media. That's a much more enigmatic aspect to this report. I saw media coverage with a contractor on site. If I'd have been invited to this, I wouldn't have been near it with a barge pole. I saw media coverage with a contractor on site. And it's only coming here today. The media release says it's still to come to committee for consultation. As elected members, we're duty bound to scrutinise and go through a democratic process of decision making. I'm wondering what's the point in doing all this. When I pick a paper up or I turn on social media and I'm told who's going to be doing the work, and the committee's not even decided yet. Now, I tell you, I feel so aggrieved about that. I'll give an advance warning as member of this committee, local resident, member of council for years, that for the first time ever, I'm taking, I think that's prima facie evidence that elected members have been undermined here, that predetermination is a dangerous issue here, and that we've been put in a situation whereby a public statement has already been made who the contractor is, and it's not been decided by the relevant service committee, and it's not went through council. I can never remember that taking place in public in 35 years as a councillor. That will go through the proper scrutiny auditors. I'll be taking it to the Standards and Ethics Committee. And I'll tell you why I wanted to have discussion on this. I think Councillor Valentine was touching on it. It seems that the T's have been crossed, the I's been dotted, and the award been made. You know, convener, you're responsible for this committee. You were on site with the contractor. But I've got questions here. It's a recommendation, it's not been approved yet. So we'll leave the standards to investigate everybody's role in this. But there's something wrong when, as an elected member, like others, have continually pushed. This is massive public money being given out in contracts that we're welcome to see. But we don't know. For instance, there's no clarification here. If surely CGC or whatever, they say they're paying above the living wage. Anybody that's been in the building game knows that that can be the case one week, not the following week. We should only be appointing, as the Scottish Government does, to their credit. We should only be giving out contracts to living wage accredited. And that's why I think this should be continued until members are guaranteed. Because what's the point in us having it in there on page 132 that the contract supports payment of the real living wage to staff employed in the delivery of the contract? It doesn't give that guarantee that this is a living wage accredited. It's okay to say, oh, we pay above it. There's got to be 24 years of work out there. I don't want the houses in my backyard or anywhere built in cheap labour because they say verbally that they're paying above the living wage. That won't always be the case. We should only be appointing contracts to those contractors and bidders that are paying the living wage. So the specific question is to the officers. Out with the procedures I'm going through with the standards and ethical procedures. Is this a living wage employer? Can I have that answer, please? Accredited living wage employer. It's not just pertinent to this item, it's also pertinent to items that's coming up. Because if we're going to be taking verbal assurances from these firms for mega bucks, you take these next items, 45 million of public money. I don't want that built in cheap labour. Councillor Valentine, I know that myself is continually asking this. Scottish Government has given us approval to spend this money. We've given approval to spend, not approval yet, and I don't think it should be approved until we get a guarantee that we are having living wage accredited tenderers put in front of us for consideration. It's not a fait accompli yet if I get my way, because depending on the answer I get, I might be moving continuation.
As for your commentary and question, Councillor Morgan, Pamela, how do we reassure the committee that the frameworks that we are contracting through are robust and how that evidence is monitored?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that we've this is a call-off programme project from the Scotland Excel framework, so that accreditation is those checks are already predetermined in terms of that contract. but I would need to come back to Councillor Morgan to confirm the detail of the checks that are undertaken and the verification of that are undertaken. But I say that is part of the Scotland Excel process in terms of the framework that we use.
Well, convener, based on that reply, I'm not accepting that I'm going to sit here and vote to approve this.
Can I pause you there?
Written...
Councillor Morgan, can I pause you there? Robert Steenson has indicated that he wants to respond to the answer.
Yeah, it's about the point about living wage accreditation and a living wage guaranteed payment for this contract, Councillor Morgan. We are not legally permitted to insist that tenderers are living wage accredited, but we can ask that they give us documented assurance that for contracts they're working on, that they will pay the living wage for everyone working on that contract. That is what we have for this contract through the Scotland Excel framework. They have given a documented guarantee that people working on these contracts for North Lanarkshire Council will be paid the living wage. Whether they're accredited or not is not something that we can insist upon, but they have given the assurance that the people working in our contracts will be paid the living wage. That's how we make sure that we comply with procurement regulations and get the wish of probably everybody on the call, officers and members alike, that living wage is paid in the contracts that we are putting public money into. Thank you.
Convener, can I clarify then? Is that in a document somewhere? Because as far as I'm concerned, somebody once said a verbal contract is not worth the paper it's written on. Unless I know that for the duration of this contract, £27 million, that everybody, every piece of labour involved is going to be paid the living wage. And it's quite simple. If these are such excellent firms, why are they not just getting living wage accreditation and saving all this question asking? Forget the procedural issue I raised earlier.
Councillor Morgan, that question has been asked and answered. We cannot insist, we can encourage. We have got economic development staff who work with those who want to seek contracts to encourage them and support them to go through the living wage accreditation, but we cannot compel. What we can do is ensure that the companies provide evidence of that. Robert, can I bring you back in, please?
That's really just to confirm that. We do not enter into verbal agreements with any contractor. Everything is documented. Their tender bid has to be submitted through the procurement portal and includes all of the details that you've asked about, Councillor Morgan. So there's no verbal offer of anything which is accepted as part of the contract. The contract is fully documented.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. I was not aware it wasn't legally enforceable. The Scottish Government does it. But what that leaves me with, as I've said earlier, I don't like being put in a position whereby my democratic right to scrutinise has been undermined, and there's an element of predetermination in this, and I'll be taking that up externally. Thank you.
You are welcome to do so. The item 13A, the recommendations, colleagues, I'm not seeing any further questions, are set out. There are 4 recommendations for 3 for noting and 3 for approval rather, and 1 for noting on page 127. Can we agree those, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you. Moving on to item 13B on page 137. It is the contract award on asbestos. Do you have anything to add to this report, Brian?
Thanks, Convener. The report's been presented for approval to the committee for the 2 lots to do with asbestos survey and domestic properties, and for lot 1 and lot 2 for domestic monitoring, sampling and surveying and non-domestic properties. Not more to add other than seeking approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions on this 13B? Alan, you've got a question. Sorry, Councillor Valentine.
It's fine, Chair. I'll answer to both. Again, then, it's what Councillor Morgan and I were talking about previously in 4.2.4, Lot 2, it's not a living wage accredited employer, and I take on board what Robert has said, the previous one, that obviously within this tender, all staff will be paid above the Scottish living wage, but my sort of mainstay on this one, and I've lost my bit of paper, which is annoying the life out of me, is the the community benefits on this one. Now, these are far smaller contracts than the two we've seen previously. The first one, lot 1 is 1 million, and lot 2 is 375,000, which is only 100,000 per year. But we do have some community benefits on these, and they seem to be proportionally far higher than what we've been offered or what is mandatory, which I'm not sure which one that is on the previous agenda item. And that disappoints me. These two companies appear to have put quite a lot of effort into the community benefit. And if I'm relating to that, in my opinion, then the previous two are not putting as much effort into the community benefit as these two companies here have. Possible comments? Thanks.
Thanks very much. Pamela, any comment in response?
Sorry, that's my report.
Oh, sorry, Brian. Sorry, Pamela was. Look of horror from Pamela there. That's my Brian, my apologies. Brian, you can have a look of horror.
So the only difference with these ones is Pamela's reports and contracts are going to order through a framework, which can either be you accept the quality scores and you just evaluate on the price. With this one, we do our own full procurement and it's price quality. So we evaluate the quality. So the tenderers have to be keener with their pencil when they're putting down community benefits. So the more they give us, the higher they score. So just from experience on frameworks, you either accept that you normally accept the quality as a given across all tenderers, and you're only evaluating on the price. So that's my only kind of explanation on that. But as I said, as it's been said by Robert and others, the information we provided in the documents about what they're going to provide, and they do pay above the living wage, and we do monitor these at our contractor supply management meetings and make sure that we get them at the right time. So I'll try my best to explain, I think, what the difference would be.
Thanks very much, Brian, and I see Councillor Valentine's happy with that. Councillor McNeill, can I invite you in next, please?
Yeah, I understand what's just been said there, but as Councillor Valentine has said, I mean, these are multi-million-pound contracts that are going out here, and I think that the community benefit should be much more substantial than it is, and I would like to encourage all officers across the council, because repeatedly elected members ask about community benefits, and sometimes it's a wee bit gets tacked on at the end, and I feel as if in a contract getting awarded is 17, 18, 19 million pounds, we should be receiving much more benefits to our community. Particularly, this is an opportunity for young, unemployed people to gain work skills that will serve them well in their future lives, and I think we should be pushing that for all of these major contracts. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor McNeill, and I'm sure we can articulate that. I think it would be, I'd said earlier that I think it would be good for us to bring further information on community benefits to a future committee, because I know that there are a number of evolutions in the background that will help elected members and communities see and feel that. Brian, sorry, I could cut in.
If I could just add to that, Councillor, it also depends on the duration of the contracts as well, because some contracts might be for 12 months, some contracts might be for 3 or 4 years. If they get an apprentice through their full term, can be difficult if you're only getting a contract to work for up to 12 months. So those are other factors to take into consideration as well.
Thanks, Brian. Can I come now to Councillor Graham? You've got a question, Alan.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I've listened with interest here, what's been said by Councillor Morgan, Councillor Valentine and Councillor McNeill with interest. And I mean, I share some of the concerns, and I know you do as well, having had discussions with this. And when I was in your position, I did ask about community benefits, because it always seems to be very little. It's like crumbs from the rich man's purse we seem to be getting here, because a lot of the community benefits don't really stack up to, I don't think, a great deal in relation to the scale of the contract. And however, what is the effect? But the question I've really got now is, what is the difference between the living wage accredited employer and Scottish living wage? What is the monetary difference?
Thanks, Councillor Graham. Who's going to take that? Robert.
Come in. I don't know the difference, Councillor Graham. Obviously, you've got the minimum wage, and then you have the living wage, and it's a differential there's done with the calculations by the groups who advise government. I can get that circulated to all members just to advise what the difference is. But I have to reiterate again, much like the living wage accreditation, community benefits are offered by the bidders as part of the tender process, and that becomes part of the overall scoring for the quality part of the assessment. So some will offer more than others, some will offer a better price than others, and what we have at the end when we come to recommend to committee is the outcome of a scoring matrix, which has got weightings against each of them, which gives us that outcome. So there may be some who offer more than others, and there may be others who are more keen on the pricing as they go through it. And it's for us to make that balance and just to give a commitment to committee. We do push very hard for community benefits through the procurement process and through all the market engagement events. And I think, as you see, as frameworks are retendered, particularly for Councillor Valentine, as the frameworks are retendered, I think you'll see that you'll now see that the companies who are bidding for public contracts now for new frameworks are actually putting a lot more in terms of community benefits than they did before, because they realise that we're looking for greater value than just delivering the contract for us now. So it is something that's at the very forefront of priorities for the procurement service. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Councillor O'Rourke.
Thanks, convener. I think my understanding of it is that we accept contracts and we call off from Scotland Excel. We don't have the ability to control their processes where they demand for certain conditions put in for community benefits. But what we do have is the council has a rep on Scotland Excel's decision-making body, and our concerns can be fed back and put in to their meetings, so that when they're making these decisions on it, we can actually influence them. And I think that should be the way we should go about it.
I'm sure Councillor Damasio was listening intently throughout that debate, and if he wasn't, I'm sure we can inform him of the challenges that have been articulated here as he's declared an interest. Councillor Burrows, can I come to you, please?
Convener, maybe will help a bit about the procurement information, especially about community benefits. At the last Housing Committee, there was a discussion on this and education, and I've asked the senior officers to put together a briefing session for members on this matter, on procurement in general, but also to link in with things like community benefits. And I know that the senior officers are looking and working that at the moment, and hopefully after July we'll have that session in place, and I hope that maybe helps the committee as we move forward. Thanks, convener.
Thanks. I'm sure that'll be welcomed by Mary, and I think benefits come in so many ways, shapes or forms. The way in which we support our Tier 1 and Tier 2 contractors to engage with our small and medium enterprises, because we know that the majority of people in North Lanarkshire are employed in small and medium enterprises, so we need to make sure that the supply chain in any of our contracts is right to engage those local businesses too. And putting my supplier development programme chairhead on here, there is a Meet the Buyer event taking place Pan Scotland in early June, and there's an excellent uptake in that, and that's about where small and medium enterprises engage with the big tier companies to find out where and how they can bid to successfully secure that and ultimately secure good wages and local opportunity for employment for local people as well as wider community benefit. I see Councillor Damasio has come into the chat bar there. Councillor Damasio.
Just to say, I'm happy to liaise with the senior officers at Scotland Excel and the council officers to get some sort of update out to members, and any questions they may have. And then any time whatsoever, just now, any time in the future, then do get in contact if you get anything you want me to raise at these meetings. Absolutely. I would concur with Bob's point. He's saying he's already raised the issue in terms of briefing sessions. I think that would be a wise move to do some briefing sessions with members on procurement and community benefits. But I would also just like to remind members we're scrutinising some of the community benefits here. I've brought a couple of motions to full council to increase the data that's provided at committee. I'll just remind members that a large proportion of the members have voted those down or put amendments up to them. So, you know, it's important to have that visibility and to be able to scrutinise the community benefits and so forth.
I appreciate that, Councillor Damaso, but we also need to recognise that there's a procurement process and staff have got their job to do, and elected members' role and within that is very different from the officers, and the frameworks have got a job to do on our behalf as well. Councillor McNeill, I'll let you come back in for a second comment.
Just a quick comment, convener, is that a lot of the business that goes to council sometimes should be dealt with at committees, in my opinion, and it would need to go to the full council. And this is the right vehicle in this committee to ask the relevant questions of the committee and the convener. So I think this is a place to ask it rather than at full council.
I concur, Councillor McNeill, but you would expect me to say that. Expect me to say that. We've got the recommendations before us, colleagues, on page B. We're 109. So can we approve that, please? No, I've just said the wrong number. No, I haven't. 127. That's 117. Gosh, gee whizzers. Too many pieces of paper. Can we approve the recommendations that are set out in this report, colleagues? 137. Thanks very much. Moving on now to item 14. If I've not jumped to any reports. It is a contract variation. Brian, can you bring us up to speed on this, please?
Thanks, convener. This is the demolition project that took place at Hull House, the 3 towers. It's a contract variation for the sum of £73,000 as a result of the COVID pandemic delaying certain things and having increased costs as a result of that, and also discovery of asbestos containing materials which couldn't have been foreseen prior to the contract being awarded. The contract is complete and it was an increase of £73,000. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Any question to Brian? Or can we note the report as agreed, as outlined in the report? 147.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much. The final report I think we've got is we've got reports for noting the configuration of licenses to confirm software. Item 15. Can we agree that report, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you. And the contracts awarded below a committee approval threshold are within item 16. Can we note that report, colleagues?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Can I thank you all for your participation in today's Housing and Regeneration Committee. Have a great day, and I will see some of you this afternoon at Councillor Graham's committee. Thank you very much.